This is Eric Rutan of Cannibal Corpse. You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast with Andrew McKay Smith.
G'day everybody, welcome to the show. I'm so pleased you can join me because I bring to you a chat with Swedish musician Olof Mörck from the groups Amaranthe, that's the main one, but he was also a member of Dragonland and Night Rage amongst others. Now the catalyst for the chat is ironically because of The Catalyst, which is the name of the group's new album. Out through Nuclear Blast, it's available now. It's sterling stuff if you like your metal with some technology and just some more very modern sounds without leaning too much into stuff that makes it not metal. It's still definably metal, no doubt about that. But the other reason for the chat is due to an Australian tour which happens at the end of this month. That is August, and it goes into September as well. If you are local, check gig guides, but I'll also put the tour dates and a link to tickets in the episode description. Now, throughout this conversation here, it's notable because it's another one where there are no topics off limit. We discuss artificial intelligence, the past, diving deep into Olof's past with some of the bands that he was in there, some of the bands that I mentioned as well. Technology, you name it, it's there, including social, current affairs and political topics. Now, if you're one of those people who doesn't like me or like political topics being brought up in music interviews, I don't give a fuck. You can leave now if you want. It's totally up to you. You regular listeners are cool. You know what I'm all about these days. These topics are meant to come up because we've all got to lead this life. And as I say throughout the chat, musicians are storytellers. So of course, sometimes you do tell stories about what is going on in the real world. This chat, there's no other way to say it, was unexpectedly good. I didn't have a lot of expectations going into it because I wasn't really, I haven't listened to a lot of interviews or really any interviews, to be honest, with Olof, but he's a great interview subject and you'll hear it. He's up for a conversation. All right, let's get into it. Olof from Amaranthe. Here he is.
Hello there.
Hey mate, how you going?
All good. How are you?
Good. How's the old Zumba grind been treating you?
It's always good. It's been a little while now, actually, since the main promotional run for the album. So kind of nice to be back at it again, chatting to fine people like yourselves.
Yeah, I was talking to John about that earlier. That was odd, wasn't it? It was given a push for a bit, and then it sort of dropped off the radar for a while, and then here we are again. So, especially with the tour, I thought that conversations would be lined up for you, well in advance of the tour, but shit happens, mate. What can you do? I'm glad John's involved now, put it that way.
Yeah. I'm not aware of exactly of how things went down before, but this is a good time for a last push in general, like almost 2 weeks away for the first show in Australia. So that's great.
Yeah. How are you feeling about these first shows? Is it nervous anticipation or something else?
I'm generally very excited to come down under for the first time. My very first show that I played outside of Sweden back in 2003 was in Japan. And we played 2 shows with a band called Dungeon, if you've heard about them.
I do. I remember Dungeon quite well back in the day. I like them. Yeah.
Yeah. Great band. Absolutely phenomenal people. And went on to, form other really great bands. But that was my first time, playing with other bands abroad. And they were saying that, maybe soon you will come down under and play. And now it's been 21 years. So I guess it's about time. So needless to say, I'm very excited.
Have you got a good response, not just from Australia, but in general to The Catalyst?
Yeah, it's been absolutely fantastic. It usually, traditionally in Amaranth history, there's always, I won't call it a mixed response, but some people, they have a good idea of exactly what they should expect and what they want to hear, which is not always, the direction that we want to go ourselves. But at this time, it was, since we were doing things a little bit differently and there's some new influences and some new elements that we wanted to put in there, I was expecting maybe a bigger backlash, but it's been very well received universally, both in terms of, streams and reviews and everything.
You're talking about the addition of greater electronic and synth elements?
No, I mean, yeah, partly we use them a little bit in a different way, but there's also symphonic elements, which we haven't really used nearly this extensively before. And there's also influences from different types of genres and even some stuff that we brought back from the early days. So there's a wide array of creativity in general for this one.
It seems like you spent a lot more time on this album, actually, and it's not just because there's a 4-year gap between the Catalyst and Manifest, but did you? It sounds like it's got a lot more depth to it. To your point, it's got another dimension that it's not that the Manifest and Helix don't have elements of these extra dimensions, but there's just far more of it with the Catalyst. So is that what? Is that? Did you take a lot more time, in other words, to get things right on this album?
Yeah, I mean, there was most of all, there was more time to be creative, to take things new places that you didn't really expect, and to even try new things that you know that you can exclude if it's not going to work. And that was partly a very logical conclusion or consequence of the pandemic, since we weren't touring at all for the Manifest album. And initially, the original plan was to take a really long break. But, as the months are passing, 2-3 months, and after 4 months, you start to get incredibly bored with life. So already then back in, let's say, early 2021 is when both me and Elise started to sketch out ideas of what the album could hypothetically be. And I could see, because you might have an idea, like, let's say, an intellectual idea of where you think you want things to go. But once you actually sit down and start to flesh things out, then you realize that your subconscious or your creative side wants to take it in a different way. And usually, almost always, me and Elise are on exactly the same wavelength. So I could see that there was some really, just from the first things that we were writing in 2021, that it was going to be a really interesting album to work on. But it's but in terms of depth and such things, I mean, sometimes you want things to be really direct, and you don't want to add too many layers. And I think at this time we just wanted to, flesh things out a little bit more.
Hey, what's your view on the role of artificial intelligence in emerging music styles?
I mean, I think it's an interesting conversation. I think people have a little bit of a tendency, because you can see it in both ways. On the one hand, I think that artificial intelligence in general, not only in music, is going to be a paradigm shift and a complete game changer in a lot of ways. But then on the other hand, I think things also have a tendency to stay more the same than they actually do change with these technological shifts. Obviously, it's going to be a problem for many professions. And I think to a certain extent, even in music, when you do music that is more for practical purposes, let's call it elevator music, or maybe music in the background to documentaries. However, I was curious to see how people were going to respond to it in the metal scene, and I am happy to say that they responded exactly as I predicted, because nobody wants that stuff with the rock music, with a few exceptions. So I think what you're going to see, I think, prompted music that is specially designed for you. I think that's really the wrong way to look at music. I don't think this will become a big thing at all, because at the end of the day, people don't want things that's customized to themselves. They want to be part of something bigger. I mean, I remember clearly what it was like to be a fan before I started to take part in the scene as an active musician. Then the greatest part was to have the shared listen experience. And I mean, I still do that today. When I hear an awesome song by some band, the first thing that I do is that I, talk to my bandmates or other friends and check this song out. It's phenomenal. But I don't think you can get to that point with, check out my prompted song here that is custom made for me. I'm having a really hard time seeing that. But having said that, I mean, there's probably a lot of potential for musical tools. Let's say that you use AI for the development of keyboard sounds or more accurate guitar amplifiers. So even as
great point.
Ethically reasonable way to compose songs, like if you can use it as a learning tool, for example. So I think there is a lot of potential for it, but to have AI replace rock bands is sounds totally out there to me.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. AI can be used and it can add a lot of value from the perspective of recreating vintage sounds without all of the cumbersome equipment that come along with that, right the way through from the type of strings you want to use. You know, there's an enormous there's a gap that it could fill, okay, for musicians who work from home. Instead of doing bullshit things like using AI to create the album covers and to fill things out, it can actually be used in a very intelligent way, as you've described. And that's the first time I've actually gone. This is the first time I've actually gone into this level of detail about AI with an artist. But I thought you were a good person to do it with, because you've willfully incorporated elements of technology into your music, but you haven't sacrificed the heavy metal quality of your sound.
No, and I mean the ultimate core of any music is the emotional language that you're using and the emotional experience. Because the thing is that what AI can never replicate is the emotions that are behind the music. Let's say with prompted music, it can emulate it to a fascinating level, and it's just gonna get more close, of course. But when you listen to it, you know that the AI hasn't had its heart broken, or it hasn't had tough or happy things in life, and you get the point. And this is what it's all about in the end. I will use one last example, because it's been possible to watch AI bots playing against each other in video games for 25 years, but no one would sit down and watch a match of FIFA or a match of, let's say, Counter-Strike with only bots, because we're not interested if there's not humans involved.
What are your thoughts on what Kiss are doing then? I know they haven't actually done it, but they've certainly put it out there that the evolution of the band is into the AI sphere. Do you think that is that something you can appreciate, not just because you may or may not like the band's music, but there's a shitload of legacy bands out there. Let's face it, Metallica will retire absolutely in the next 15 years. I just can't imagine James Hetfield's going to be up there doing what he's doing at the age of 76. So, Iron Maiden as well, for that matter. So would you embrace, from a fan's perspective, do you embrace this or something else?
I mean, to me, my spontaneous reaction about this, for example, when ABBA is doing something similar there also, and I think it sits just in a different spectrum, that it might even have its place. I was very, very skeptical about it initially, but I can kind of see the point of it, because it would be a little bit like it sits somewhere between going to a live show and watching an old DVD of Metallica, let's say. For example, I love to watch the live shit Binge and Purge from back in the day, like the San Diego show from 92 or Seattle 89, some of the best live performances ever. And obviously this is a, time, what do you call it? Like a snap shot of what it used to be like back in the day, but it's not them performing. It's just the computer rendering the stuff. So if one sees it like this is something of a crossover, you still go to an arena, you still share the experience and kind of watch it together with people. Like this is what it used to be, like a little bit like a historical document. Then I suppose it could have its place, but once again, it's still about the human aspect, because a show is very much not only about the people performing, because it's also about the audience and how the audience interacts with each other, not only necessarily the band itself. So then it can still become a human experience, because there's some humanity in it, because there's potentially 30,000 other people there also that are drinking beer and talking and, enjoying music together and whatnot. So I don't think it's something that is going to become a huge trend, but I think, as you're saying, as these bands are stopping to perform, it might get more common. I don't think it will ever actually replace live shows per se.
Yeah. Great observations there, actually. Yeah. What about with all of the changes with technology and as you're a band where it's integrated to an extent, but as I say, doesn't ever sacrifice the quality of the heavy metal you're producing, in my view. But is there any conflict within the band about the direction in which you want to take the group? Like, for example, do you want to introduce more tech, and do you want to dive deeper into AI with the way that you write music? And do some of the other band members have a different view?
Well, I think, since a long time ago, I think more or less always with this band, people have been on board where the songwriters want to take it, because we were there writing the music from the beginning. And if I guess it has happened maybe at some point, a decade ago or something like that people were a little bit like, are we sure that this is exactly what we want to do? But maybe they didn't know exactly what was going to sound like in the end. And sometimes with demos, it can be a little bit hard to, because we do really sketchy demos, me and Elise, just to get a feel for what the song is. And sometimes when people hear it, it's like, yeah, isn't this a little bit too much keyboard? And I'm like, yeah, it's not going to be that much keyboard in the end, because it's not mixed yet, or the other way around. But no, there has been actually surprisingly few disagreements. I've seen more of this, in the past, when people are more, we have more people involved in the songwriting process, and then it can become a little bit messy. Me and the other main songwriter, Elise, we tend to be on the same wavelength, because when it comes to writing new music, typically your latest album tends to be, or the album that you're working on tends to be a little bit of a reaction on the previous album that you're working on, because you don't want to keep on repeating yourself, one to one, doing exactly the same thing. So, I mean, the Catalyst is perfect, once again, timestamped for exactly what we wanted to do, when we started to write that in 2021, but might not necessarily at all be where we're heading. Because sometimes people think they can see a direction, okay, they're heading in that direction, but we also have this possibility to go in very different directions, because we have all these different influences. And based upon what we decide to emphasize, it can create quite different results.
You decided to resurrect Dragonland in 2022. How was that received?
Yeah, that was really phenomenal. I mean, we obviously at that point hadn't released an album for 11 years, I believe it was. And I mean, it sucks a little bit to be a fan of a band and then they, stay away for 11 years. But I guess it's a lot better that we finally released something than just disappearing, altogether. Mm-hmm. And I think that there was some really great reception. I think it's a really fantastic album. And I think it really motivated all the other guys to, keep at it. So there's been a lot of activity in the Dragonland camp as of late. I can't really say anything more than that at this point, but I can say that people will not have to wait 11 years this time, much less.
Gotcha. Well, what about when you look back? I think your first album, for example, I always frame things in this way for obvious reasons, but the first album that we in Australia could have heard you on was the Battle of the Ivory Plains. So was that your first recording experience, that one?
Yes, it was actually. That was, I guess I was 17 back then or something like that, maybe 18. But it was a long time ago. And fact of the matter is that I listened to these albums just the other day for the first time in probably a decade at the very least. And they still have a certain charm. They're also very reflective of where we were, musically at that point. And it's kind of musically sits in a different era. It's so old that it's almost, I think, in 2 years it will be quarter of a century old. Yeah. So I think that's really cool, also. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, we especially with the way your career's evolved, because Amaranthe and Dragonland are two very different bands. Would you have started out differently, or are you happy with the way that you started out with Dragonland? Are you proud of that early work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the stuff that we were doing with Dragonland kind of, for me personally, naturally transformed into what then later became Amaranthe in terms of musical ideas. Because the two first albums were very straightforward, classic power metal, which was exactly the intention also. And then already on the third album, Starfall, back in 2004, then we started to experiment with some more modern keyboards, some heavier, more downtuned guitars, and a little bit closer to the Gothenburg style melodic metal that we have over here. So I think that was the very first seed for me that then led into to Amaranth. So Amaranth couldn't have existed if it wasn't for the years that I had in Dragonland. So I learned so much from songwriting and to develop as a musician and so on.
I didn't think you'd say that, meaning going from Dragonland into Amaranthe, because Night Rage would be the band that I thought the Gothenburg thing would be most prominent for you. So you did a couple of albums there. Are you planning on resurrecting that beast anytime?
I mean, they have a very solid lineup now and they're really happy where they're at. And they also know why I had to step down back then. But it was a phenomenal time. It was a good run, 7 years, I believe. But most of the Gothenburg melodic death metal sound was it kind of shaped me, in the middle of the 90s, because I was just the right age when In Flames and Dark Tranquillity were releasing their first few albums, and there were bands like that were playing every weekend here in Gothenburg. So it was a really exciting way to grow up as a fan, but also as a musician to see that there's all these very young bands that can have success. Like the first metal shows that I saw with At the Gates and In Flames and Dark Tranquillity was back in 95. Mm-hmm. So I was obviously very young at the time, like 13, 14 years old, but they were only 22, 23. So they were also super young considering the level of success they had. At the Gates with Slaughter of the Soul, they were 23 years old when they recorded it, which is crazy young compared to almost all bands today. So they were essentially showing that it was possible, to achieve a certain amount of success as a musician. It was at least a viable idea to put your time into, let's say. But then, so I played a lot of this music all the way up to when I recorded the first Dragonland album. So for me, it was only melodic death metal, and I wrote a bunch of songs in that style with an older band called Rapture that I never released any albums with. So that was always part of the DNA, and it was definitely there, for Amaranth and its inception as well, to add a little bit more of that back.
Yeah, so I didn't realise the band was still going, actually. I know they're sort of disbanded, but God, they've had a lot of members, haven't they, come in and out of the group. It seems to be one of those bands that it's like 5 or 6 degrees of separation in the Swedish and extreme metal music scene if you've been in the band, including Bill Hudson was a session member for a period of time.
Yeah, that's right. I almost forgot about that. Yeah, there's been a lot of different members there throughout the years, but I just saw that recently the old drummer Fotis, who played on the second album, is back. So I think they kind of come a little bit full circle, also in a way. I released a new album, I think, very recently. That sounds fantastic to me.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Yeah, I haven't heard it. As I say, I certainly knew you were in the group, but there's so many bands around these days, as you're aware. It's unless you get given an opportunity to do this or they're released through Nuclear Blast, Sumerian, the big labels I'm talking about. It's very hard to sort of grasp onto what's going on. It tends to sort of hear and gone quickly. To give you an example, it'd be in the hundreds of new releases get sent to me every week. It's no exaggeration. It's because I'm connected to, all the people at the PR agencies and want you to do the interviews and do the album reviews, and you just can't do it all, to be quite honest with you. It's you got to be a bit selective in this game, but and that's a good point, actually.
That sounds like a lot of work, but it gives you a good idea of what's going on. But I agree. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's a completely hopeless battle to try to keep track of everything that is happening. But every now and then, something peaks a little bit above the surface that is really amazing. So there's also that.
I'll say this, though. The rules haven't changed from when I was a young fella in the 90s, and I found out the hard way when I had next to no money and I took a punt on some underground bands, and they were absolutely shit. And then I thought, well, fuck this. I don't have any. Back in the 90s, I had no money. Who did when to your point, 15, 16, 17, 18, like who does? And this is back before Napster and stuff. So for me, because I'm 46, so you'd go in and buy secondhand records, and if they were a dud or what have you, that was back and then. CDs even then were $15, $20 for secondhand ones. They still weren't cheap. And I learned.
Yeah, exactly.
My point is I learned to stick with the labels. So Music for Nations, Earache, Nuclear Blast, Spine Farm, Moonfog. I learned to go with the albums. If I was going to take a punt, to do that, or the samplers were a really good way as well. But that leads into the point I was going to make, which was that it is actually really hard to stand out these days, to be frank. I mean, I say, you got to be on the Nuclear Blast. That gives you a leg up that other bands simply won't have if they're not on a minor major, if you know what I mean. But in your view, what do you do specifically to stand out from the rest?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting topic because just because you have, and it kind of connects with a bunch of things that we've been talking about, because just because you have, better tools, better technology, and, the studio process that you have these days can make bands that are maybe not so experienced sound a lot better, to say it gently. But I think the same thing is still required as it was, back in the day, is that it requires a crazy amount of experience to really get out there, in terms of live shows, to really perform good shows and to really have it well thought out, and also, have your promo side together, your business side together, to plan stage shows, and, most of all, to write and record music. And this was the case back in the 80s or the 70s. This is the case today as well, which is why you're not seeing a crazy amount more of the successful bands today than you were doing in the 90s, even though it should be, a lot easier in a way, because you still require a lot of things that aren't necessarily easy to come by. And I mean, in our case, it's partly the fact that we had a lot of experience before we started this band. And we started at a young age, all of us, with our different projects, and then took all that experience and started this band. And we still saw it as a learning process. And I still see it as a learning process in terms of, keeping an open mind, not close yourself to ideas, and also to learn from the continuous mistakes that you make. Because as you grow as a band, you're always treading kind of uncharted territory. So what works here might not work here at all, on a different level. So, and the other aspect is that we kind of consciously, when we started the band, formed it to stick out also. And we weren't doing anything that was kind of popular back then, because this was more of a deathcore, metalcore era when we started the band in 07 or 08. And we didn't want to do the same thing as everybody else was doing. So we didn't want to start yet another, Trivium or, As I Lay Dying, which was, the biggest shit back then. And to a certain extent still going. But then there were millions of bands like that. Now you only had the people who actually trailblazed that genre are the only ones that are left, basically.
Yeah.
So we kind of just wanted to start our own thing, and it didn't necessarily have to become a trend or anything like that, which I didn't think it became either. So we were not trailblazers for a new genre or something like that. It was more like we were working outside of the box that we were feeling was getting already too crowded, even back then in 11. And obviously this is right where Spotify kind of kicked off. So it's a lot more crowded now. Yeah. And I guess it's even harder to stick out. So I guess, when you're starting a band and when you're working on music, I think that you're doing your own thing, and that there's a certain kind of originality is absolutely key. And that originality can even be that you're resurrecting some kind of, old stuff that hasn't been around for a long time. Let's say like Volbeat incorporating 50s Johnny Cash into their heavy metal. Cool. Something different, something that people haven't heard before. And then, there's 10,000 people who are berating the music and saying that what's so special about it? And I'm like, because it's different. It's not the same band, that's already been started 1,000 times before. So I think this is really key and center for any artist today.
Here's a different question for you. You're not what I would describe as a political or socially aware band, but I could be missing the point completely. So does politics, the economic environment, and these myriad of social issues that are affecting us, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, do any of them make your lyrical content and even impact the way you create music?
I mean, I guess it's hard to not be impacted by it in some shape or form. And as you say, we're not this political band that wants to, take our arguably quite strong opinions and force it upon anybody else. But there are certain things that I think regardless of where you stand politically or socially whatnot, that people can kind of agree on are actual problems, like ongoing conflicts in the world that we've seen way too much of as of late. Nobody really wants that. That's not what, except for a few crazy people, and same thing with over focus on technology and social media and these things, which is ironic coming from a band that incorporates a lot of technological elements. But I think we deal with a lot of these things that we feel are more universal and less divisive, because let's face the fact that the world is a lot more divisive than it used to be 15 years ago, for example. And we've seen this pop up, throughout history. Like, for example, how divided the US was, in the early 70s with the Vietnam War and these things. So, I mean, it's not the first time that it happens, but we're about the same age, and in our lifetime, it's been a lot less of this stuff than we've been seeing recently. And there's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, the pandemic surely didn't help, and also lots of different invasions, conflicts to an extent that we also haven't seen for a very long time. So this has affected us greatly, and it might not always be obvious in our music, but it also affects you emotionally, which then gets translated into music also.
Yeah, good response. Yeah. I've spoken to enough of you guys from the Swedes. I've spoken to well over 100 at this point, and I went through the university I went through. There were a lot of students from Sweden. They're just down the road here, Bond, but it's an international uni, so the Australian cohort wouldn't even be half. The rest would be all over the world. Just tons of Norwegians and Scandinavians and Swedish. So what I did notice is that there's a massive similarities between the Swedes and Australians. It seemed to be cut from similar cloth, and I think that's true also. In our societies, we've had to deal with the I'm only calling it how I see it, and people are used to me talking about these topics on the show, so don't worry. But how we've had to deal with the influx of multiculturalism and how it's affected us. And I know in Sweden, you've got Malmö, which is some of the documentaries on coming out of Malmö at the moment are truly shocking. And Stockholm is a bit like Sydney. Western Sydney too is Jesus Christ, good luck, out that way. But yeah, I mean, it's impossible, to your point, for it not to have some sort of impact on us in the way, forget about music, just in the way in which we lead our lives, in which we want to raise children, and the way in which our tax dollars are spent, and the way they're siphoned off into these special interest groups and stuff. You've probably seen that moronic breakdancer from Australia in the Olympics. Have you seen the memes going around about her? Surely, yeah. I mean, you couldn't read it.
I did see it.
$90,000 of our public funds went toward a woman who couldn't breakdance. Let's face it. I know nothing about breakdancing yet. I saw the other competitors, then I saw her. So all these people with all of these social axes to grind. She's a so-called university professor at fucking Macquarie University in Sydney, and they do these bizarre dissertations and these papers about, how intersectional, patriarchy, whatever it might be, finish the sentence, it's all the isms, affect how females can breakdance, and it's all bullshit, right? But here we are as musicians stuck in the centre of all of this stuff, having to make sense of it, because as musicians, and I count myself in this too because I am one too, we're storytellers. And as a podcaster, I feel it's my job also to bring
exactly
these topics as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think this is it's a very interesting thing, because you've seen these developments tend to go in waves. It's a little bit like I said before with the songwriting and writing albums, and one era is a reaction to the other one, and to a certain extent, I think you might not always appreciate it when you're right in the middle of it, in terms of politics and stuff like that. But with these developments that we've seen in the Western world being very divided on these topics, I think from my point of view, I think it's kind of already turned around a little bit, and it's heading the other way. This is what you can see politically in Europe, for example, and I'm sure it's the same for Australia, because if you have very strong ideas of how you want to change society, then this is going to affect a lot of people. And if it's untried, then, it might lead to consequences that you're not expecting. And the thing is that there needs to be an open dialogue about it. If people have qualms with the way that society is developed, then people should be able to speak about it openly. And I think that's maybe the biggest problem that we've seen in the Western world in the last 10 years is there's been an idea that you should not speak about some of the issues and some of the problems that you mentioned. And I think that when you're trying to do that, regardless of which side on the political fence you are standing on, you're going to ask for trouble. And the same obviously goes for if, conservatives who were trying to silence the left in the 80s in the US and, trying to ban video games and whatnot. You know what I mean? This is never going to work. It's only by open dialogue that you will reach not necessarily harmony, but if the let's say it frankly, if the left is not in an open conversation with the right, trying to get some kind of understanding of each other's standpoints, then you're going to have trouble. Like you saw just the other day in England, also, for example.
Oh God, yeah.
So I think that, people are really, really tired of being silenced, and people are waking, even on the highest level, even the elite and the politicians are waking up to the fact that this is going on, and it can no longer be ignored. Because you can shut your eyes and ears as a leader of a country, for example, or the leader of a band for that matter. And it's only going to work for so long. It will work for a little bit, but sooner or later, your ivory tower is going to come crashing down.
I hope you're right. I really do hope you're right. And I'm not seeing that swing, unfortunately. You probably saw on the news that we in Australia were locked down more than any other jurisdiction, whereas you in Sweden, who are socially democratic, i.e. have had long history of left-wing governments, were very open. It's crazy, and we're in Queensland, which is a little bit different. We're the rednecks or what have you. We get paid out for being the non-progressive order. We couldn't give a shit. We don't care. We're like Florida or what have you, I suppose, if you want to use American parlances on things. But I saw what was going. I still see, of course, we do what's going on right now in the UK, and the way it's an authoritarian creep from the left, and to your point, you're right. In the past, it has been on the right, but now it's the left that are taking these authoritarian tenets and applying them. For example, locking up people for Facebook comments, which is what I've seen go on in the past week in the UK. And when they start doing that, and to your very sound observation there, when you silence speech, you don't know what the outcome is going to be after that, because what we do know, courtesy of World War II, and when I say World War II, that era, okay, the rise of the communists through the Eastern Bloc, okay, and we saw what happened. Well, we know from history what happened in the Ukraine, there where people weren't allowed to eat. If you picked up so much as a grain of whatever it was that you were harvesting and used that for your family, it was punishable by death. Okay, and and people know this who I share this. My father-in-law, who's long past, was from Croatia, former Yugoslavia, and had to get out because of the social unrest there. He would have been murdered if he'd stayed there. He used to tell me the stories about what it was like there, and just don't think people have lived through those tough times enough. Which is okay. We haven't had tough times for a long time, which is good, but unfortunately it leads to a lot of very soft people who are prepared to accept and put up with authoritarianism. And what we're seeing now is that apology for authoritarianism. And that I can't understand that side of it. So I do like talking about these things with musicians because, as I say, we are the storytellers, and I think it's important to obtain your very informed perspective on these things. So I appreciate you going there.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
I'll make this my final question for you. You've had a long enough career now. It's almost a quarter of a century. I might as well say a quarter of a century, because no doubt there were demos done when you were a young fella.
Yeah.
You've been doing this a long time, mate. So when's the book coming out?
Interesting. Yeah, I guess this is because there's, once again, two different perspectives. One is that there's a lot of good stories to tell. Speaking of storytelling. So, I mean, obviously throughout the years, I made little notes for whenever you have a great experience. And obviously social media, from a positive perspective, actually keeps a very good photo album of all your experience from, the last 15 years or so. So, I mean, there are good stories to tell. And the question is of when the right moment would be for this. Is it now? Is it in 10 years? Is it in 20? I I will leave that up to not circumstance, but to the future, basically. But I mean, it's something that I would love to do in the future. I love to write in both prose lyrics and poetry and whatnot. So that would be a very cool story to tell someday, because there are really good ones.
Yeah, I've just finished a book for a Norwegian black metal musician, and mate, the stories are what you consider ordinary and by the by are very interesting to people like me and a lot of the fans, because we don't tour and we haven't been on a bus for months and weeks on end or whatever it might be, and stuck at airports and seen the shenanigans you see go on and all the stuff that happens backstage and stuff. And I bet you've got plenty of stories to tell. So I hope you take that advantage of that opportunity when that does present itself.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been ups and downs, and things have been everything but normal. Actually, one could express it like that.
Well, thanks very much for the chat. Look, good luck with the Australian tour. I know it's selling well, and congratulations on the catalysts, and not just that, your career to date, but long may you continue to make excellent heavy metal well into the future.
Well spoken, and thank you so much for taking the time. I know that you're a busy man and you have many interviews, so I appreciate it, and really interesting topics. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for participating, brother. Excellent. See you down here.
Take care, bro. See you.
Well, there you have it. I told you up front it was a good one, and I'm just grateful Olof was prepared to go there and have a genuine chat, a genuine conversation. Yes, I like those ones. They're my favourites. All right. There are many more conversations over at Scars and Guitars. Do check it out. Members of bands such as Testament, Emperor, Death, Morbid Angel, Cannibal Corpse, Cradle of Filth, Immortal. It's all over there. Yes, indeed it is. scarsandguitars.com. I also do a monthly music show, because you heard me talking about all of the new releases that I get sent, and I try to pick ones that are compelling, and it's not always easy. Sometimes I don't have enough time, so I can only listen to songs a little bit, and then I discover after I've posted the music show that I either really like a band because of the tune, or sometimes I think my expectations have not been met. But that's cool. Either way, that's what a music show is all about. It's about playing brand new music. New stuff. You make up your mind whether or not you like a legacy band's new material or a newer band's debut. Maybe it's their debut, and I do that quite a bit on the show. I also have a feature album. So, for example, in July, it was Nocturnus AD's newie, Mike Browning, ex-Morbid Angel. Tremendous. All right, that's it from me. My name's Andrew Mackay Smith, and I'm the host of the show, Scars and Guitars. Until the next one, it's a goodbye for now.